Welcome back, everybody. We're breaking down UFC Fight Night, Holm versus Vieira. Kind of an interesting card here. The main event is a little weak, but we do have a nice co-main. And there are some pretty interesting matchups as well on this card. But, we're going to be getting a couple weeks off after this, so, I'm not going to complain too much here. I think there should be a few fun fights here. But, without wasting too much time, I want to get into the recap for the previous event. So, not a great event for me. Just been going up and down lately on, the past few weeks. But, let's get right into it. Nick Maximov, Andre Petroski. So, I picked Maximov here. I thought he'd take it in the second or third round. Obviously, Petroski is live to finish in that first round. The guy does start very strong. I thought Maximov would be able to stay safe in there. The guy is a black belt. He trains with some really good grapplers, so, I didn't think he'd get submitted early. I thought that, if he survived that first round, he'd have a really good chance of just putting the pace on Petroski, but obviously that didn't happen. Petroski was able to get the finish early. Moving along, Tatsuro Taira, Carlos Candelario. Kind of glad this got pushed back, because otherwise I would have lost a unit on this fight. But, Taira looking like a pretty legit prospect, very well-rounded, very young as well, so I do think he's got a lot of upside in the division. I think that if he continues to, shore up his striking a little bit more, he'll definitely be, I think, a contender in maybe like the next 3 or 4 years. Really looking forward to, his continued development. And, Candelario is no slouch either. But he was able to beat Candelario in the striking and in the grappling. So, pretty impressive performance. Moving along, Verna Jandiroba, Angela Hill ended up not having much action on this fight. I was kind of teeter-tottering between Jandiroba by submission or Hill by decision. And, good thing I didn't touch it, because I would have lost money there. But I thought Hill would have a little more success stuff in the takedowns. But, I think Angela Hill is getting a bit up there in age now. It doesn't seem like her conditioning and her strength is quite as good as it used to be. And she's not a big enough power threat, on the feet to really threaten much standing. But that was also a pretty solid performance from Jandiroba as well. Solid 3-round performance. But we move along. Michael Johnson, Alen Patrick ended up having a small play on Patrick by decision. I just thought he'd have maybe a little more success with the grappling and just kind of grind his way out to a decision. Wasn't super confident in this one, which is why I only played it for, I think, like 0.3 units or something. I like the Michael Johnson side, but, I felt like he was just a little liable to potentially choke a fight away, so I didn't want to place any money on him. I thought there might have been value on the Patrick by decision, but obviously it wasn't happening. But moving along, Viviane Araújo, Andrea Lee ended up taking the fight, goes the distance. Didn't bet a side here. I thought it'd be a pretty close fight, but Araújo just had a very solid performance. The cardio held up. Was a little surprised by that, and crazy durability from both fighters. I was a little worried that the fight goes the distance, wouldn't cash there, because there were a few moments that it looked like Araújo could have gotten finished, and same with Lee as well. But, both fighters showed pretty good durability and toughness there. Good heart as well. And, really solid performance from Araújo. Moving along into the main card, Jake Hadley, Alan Nascimento. Pretty bad bet here. I bet Hadley by decision. I thought he'd have a little more, wrestling success, but, the guy didn't really even look for takedowns until the third round, when he'd already dropped 2 rounds. And I don't know what the game plan was, but it looked like he might have been looking to just keep the fight standing and strike. But I think after the first round, when it was clear that Nascimento wanted to grapple and that he was giving up too much top control time, that, Hadley needed to change it up and just look to hit some offensive takedowns. And, I feel that if he'd done that, for at least 2 of the 3 rounds, he potentially could have won a decision here. But at the end of the day, he is a pretty green fighter making his UFC debut, so probably shouldn't have expected too much from him. So, not a great bet there. But on to the next fight, Frank Camacho, Manuel Torres. I bet Camacho here. Also bet him by submission. I just thought that maybe, he'd look to grapple a little bit, seeing as how Camacho is actually a solid grappler, and Torres has been submitted a couple of times, pretty recently, actually. But this is just your typical Camacho performance. It's kind of funny. The judges were, or not the judges, the commentators were talking about him improving his defense, but literally all he did was have his hands up. He wasn't even moving his head or anything, and he was just walking into punches. So, what can I say there? It's just a pretty shitty performance from Camacho. It looked like he might have wanted to level change on a few occasions, but he just never really committed to it. I think it would have been better if he at least tried to get the fight to the ground, because he was getting absolutely destroyed on the feet, and he showed zero just adjustments in fight. The corner work a little sketchy there as well. Timo Yama looking pretty bad here. 3 dud performances in like the past week and a half. Moving along, Ketlen Chookagian, Amanda Hebos. I did bet Chookagian here. Also parlayed the fight goes the distance as well. And fortunately, those bets did cash, kind of salvaged the night for me a little bit. Was a little surprised with how much success Ribas was having with the grappling, but I think the decision was right here. I think Chookagian was doing a lot more on the feet, at least enough to kind of offset the control time that Ribas was getting in that first or second round. A lot of people probably disagree, but I'm probably a little biased here too because I did have a bet here, but I just felt that Hebos, she was walking into a lot of the strikes, and I felt that Chookagian was just doing a lot more damage, and it looked like on a few occasions she had Hebos on like wobbly legs and stuff, but Chookagian by decision. That's usually how it goes. But moving along, Davey Grant Smolka versus Louis Smolka. I did bet Smolka here. Also bet him to win by submission as well. Thought he'd have a little more grappling success, and there was an exchange at the end of the second round where I feel like he could have committed a little more to looking for the submission, but he kind of just was content to let Davey stand back up and strike at distance. But as for Smolka, I feel like his durability is pretty shot. He's getting hurt by kicks. He's getting hurt to the body. And he's getting finished a lot lately as well. So I think his durability is done at this point. I do think he's pretty liable to get finished quite a bit going forward. But moving along, Ryan Spann, Ian Kudalaba. I did end up putting a unit bet on Kudalaba by decision. The unit sizing was definitely a bit whack there, but I did feel that, both guys have gone to a decision before, and, I kind of did favor this fight to go under. I did think that someone would get finished, but, I think the fight ends in round 1 was like plus 100 or something. So I felt that, if it did go to a decision, I'd kind of favor the guy who'd be able to win minutes, and that would be Kudalaba. But of course, Spann is very live to finish in that first round. The guy is a very explosive, striker, and he does have a very nasty guillotine, which he was able to hit here. However, for this card, I kind of faded the guys who were, kind of round 1 or bust, and they all ended up winning in the first round. So, it's just one of those nights, but we got to keep it moving along. Main event, Jan Blachowicz, Alexander Rakic. I did bet Rakic here for 4 units. Really unfortunate what happened here. Really would have liked to seen the fight play out a little more. And, a lot of people are going to say, the guy blew out his knee because he was getting his legs or his kicks checked. And, Jan was doing some damage with the low leg kicks. But, how often is a guy, blowing out his knee doing that? So, got hit with a bit of variance here. Not much else to say. Really unfortunate for Rakic. The guy's probably going to be out for another year and a half. And, he's not the most active fighter to begin with, so put in a pretty tough spot here. But that'll do it for the recap. We got another event to break down here, 11 fights. So without further ado, let's get right into it. And in the first fight of the card, we have Sam Hughes versus Elise Reed. And Reed is the minus 150 favorite. Come back on Hughes is plus 130. So we'll start with the underdog in Hughes, who's actually making a pretty quick turnaround, after beating Nunes and making me look like an idiot here. But honestly, I feel like my assessment of Hughes hasn't changed too much. I think that Hughes is a pretty basic fighter. She's kind of plotty on the feet, very hittable, but, she is pretty tough and she will move forward, which can win you some fights in the women's division, especially at the lower levels. And she is actually coming off of win where, she showed a very good toughness and heart and inability to stick to the game plan. But I just felt that for that performance, I'd say was more so Nunes fighting a terrible game plan. Nunes just completely unloaded the clip in that first round and basically got Homer Simpson in the second and third rounds. It's very clear that Nunes, was the better striker on the feet. And if she'd had paced herself a little better, she could definitely have won, 2 of the 3 rounds, pretty easily. So overall, I really don't think that Hughes is that good. She's got some good attributes, but I just don't think she's quite as good, on a technical level. And she's going to be going up against Reed, who is a pretty decent boxer, nothing special, pretty meat and potatoes. Does seem to be somewhat heavy-handed, decent footwork and volume. Has shown she could wrestle a little bit and has shown a pretty good top game, but she can get pretty sloppy there. And she's, fought some pretty low-level fighters overall. It's coming off of a solid performance against McKenna, who I think has got some potential. But overall, I think that Reed, she is a pretty scrappy fighter who is someone who will, move forward and throw volume as well. So, taking a look at this matchup, I do think that both have pretty similar attributes, but I feel that Reed might just be a little sharper and a little quicker in there. Hughes, I think she might be the more physical fighter, but I think that she's a little more defensively lax, a lot more hittable. Reed, I think, has got the better footwork, better quickness. I think that she'll likely be able to beat Sam Hughes to the punch. I think she's going to be able to stay a little more defensively sound. Hughes might have some success with the grappling, but Reed, I think, showed decent takedown defense and, pretty good get-ups against a better grappler in McKenna. So I don't know how much more success Hughes will be able to have. So I got to go with Reed in this spot here. I think Reed should be able to do enough to win a unanimous decision here. I think that, volume-wise, they'll probably be pretty equal, but I just think that in terms of the optics, it'll look a lot better when Reed is landing her punches. Hughes, again, is very hittable. She gets busted up pretty easily as well. And on top of that, she's actually making a pretty quick turnaround after taking a decent amount of damage in that fight. I know she ended up winning, but the first round and a half, the first 7.5 minutes, she was actually taking quite a beating from Nunes, and about a month turnaround, cutting weight again. I don't know if that's a great idea for her, so I got to go with Reed here. I just think she's the more technical striker. She's got better footwork. She's going to be a tad undersized here, but she's going to be a little quicker, which I think balances out a little bit. But yeah, I do think she'll be able to do enough on the feet to win a decision here. I kind of do like this fight to go to a decision. I don't think either's much of a submission threat. I think both are pretty tough as well, and neither's a massive hitter. So I do think this fight likely goes to a decision. And I do favor Reed to win at least 2 of the 3 rounds. So give me Reed here. Give me Reed by unanimous decision. And moving along, we have Chase Hooper versus Felipe Colares. And Colares is the -160 favorite. Hooper is the +140 underdog. And we'll start with the favorite in Colares first. So right off the bat, I just have to say I'm not very high on Colares whatsoever. I think he's a pretty terrible striker. He fights in that karate stance, but, he leaves his chin way up in the air. He's very hittable, just very terrible striking defense in general. Very low output as well, just a ton of singular strikes, doesn't really put combinations together or set anything up. But, he is more of a grappler, so I guess it's, you can excuse him a little bit there. But, his wrestling, I don't think is great. I don't think the technique is quite there. I see him, just picking guys up and carrying them to his corner and just slamming them. So, a lot of brute force with his takedowns. And, on top, he's not the most active fighter as well. Usually prioritizes control, but, even then, I don't think he does a great job doing that. But, he does have some decent attributes. He's a tough guy with good cardio, and he generally will make fights, just very sloppy and grimy. Does have a couple of UFC wins against Pilardi and Sanders, but not the best wins in my opinion. The Pilardi fight was very sloppy, very close, and Pilardi, in my opinion, is a terrible fighter, probably the worst fighter in the division. And his other win is against Sanders, where he damn near got finished in that first round, but was able to continue moving forward and was able to hit takedowns and eventually win the fight against a Sanders who was completely gassed in that second and third round. So overall, I really don't think Colares is that good of a fighter. And, I feel like the UFC is trying to give Hooper another win here. I feel like the UFC is trying to build Hooper a bit up. But the thing with Hooper is I don't really think he's much to write home about either. He's a pretty solid grappler, but I think his stand-up is pretty horrendous as well. He does seem pretty rangy, and he does use his kicks, pretty effectively. But the thing with Hooper is he's just way too slow on the feet. Very big windup in his shots, very hittable, very predictable with his striking. However, he is pretty consistent with the grappling. He will dive for the legs, will pull guard, and on the mat, he's actually pretty slippery. Will look to snatch up, any limb he can get his hands on. And he has been having success, on a regional level and to a certain extent at the UFC level as well. But they're against, pretty poor defensive grapplers and pretty low-level fighters as well. So, pretty interesting matchup here. We have two grapplers going at it. But I do think that Colares might actually be the better striker on the feet, which is kind of weird to say. I mean, Hooper, I just think is pretty limited with the striking, pretty limited to kicks, and I just think that the speed is going to be a big issue here. He winds up big on his shots, and I do think they're kind of telegraphed in there. Whereas Colares, while I don't think his striking is great, he does seem to be a little quicker in there, does seem to have, pretty quick hands. But in terms of the grappling, I think that while both guys are pretty competent grapplers, I kind of favor Colares a little more there as well. I think both guys are black belts, but I think the difference here is Colares does seem to be the physically stronger guy. I think that Hooper, he hasn't quite filled out his frame yet. The guy still seems a little physically weak. He's getting bullied in the clinch quite a bit by a number of his opponents. And I think part of the reason why Hooper hasn't really been able to convert a lot of his takedowns isn't because the guy's got terrible wrestling or anything. I think it's just because he's not quite strong enough to finish a lot of these takedowns. So yeah, I think that Colares is probably going to be the more physical guy in this matchup here. And, with Hooper, he's only 22 years old. He's 6'1", 145 pounds. So, I feel like he's just barely filled out that frame. So I think that he could kind of get bullied a bit here in terms of the grappling. So as far as this fight goes, I kind of have to side with Colares. I think that the striking is, pretty competitive. I don't think that either guy's particularly good on the feet, but I do favor the speed of Colares a little bit more. So I kind of have to give him the edge there. And as far as the grappling goes, I kind of have to give him the edge there as well. I think both guys are pretty solid grapplers. But I think that the strength is really what's going to be able to put Colares ahead here in a lot of these grappling exchanges. So overall, I feel that Colares, he's going to have the advantage kind of wherever the fight goes, in which case, I'd kind of have to pick him, but, not super thrilled about it. I really don't think Colares is that good of a fighter, but I just think that in this matchup, he kind of edges Hooper in most areas of the fight. So I like Colares here. I think he gets it done by decision. I think this fight likely does go the distance as well. I don't think either guy's much of a striking threat on the feet, and both guys have actually shown some crazy durability, so I don't think a knockout's happening. Maybe a submission, if someone gets sloppy, but, both guys are black belts, and so I think that, they should be able to stay safe and not get submitted by the other guy. Of course, someone could get sloppy in a transition or something and get something snatched up, but I do think that it'll likely go to decision. I kind of get Claudio Puelles versus Jordan Levitt vibes here, where it could be a fight where it ends up on the ground and we just see some, a lot of grappling exchanges, but, nothing crazy happening. One guy probably just get a lot of top control time, but I wouldn't be surprised if it just played out on the feet either. Both guys are grapplers who don't have great striking, so maybe they think that they could test each other's striking here, and it could just end up being a striking affair, in which case I kind of favor it to go the distance anyway. So give me Colares in this spot. Give me Colares by unanimous decision. And in the next fight, we have Jonathan Martinez versus Vince Morales. And Martinez is the minus 185 favorite, comeback on Morales is plus 155. And we'll start with the underdog in Morales first. So with Morales, he is primarily a boxer, pretty one-dimensional if I'm being honest. The guy does have pretty quick hands, pretty good timing, and is, pretty good on the counter as well. But outside of that, I do think he's a pretty limited fighter. Supposedly he can wrestle, but we haven't really seen that from him yet. He does supposedly train with Ricky Simona. I think they're like cousins or something, but by and large, this guy's really just looking to strike in there. But the thing that really stood out to me for Morales is how much he's struggled with kickers. Obviously, he got finished with a leg kick by Gutierrez. Really had no answers for that whatsoever in that fight. But, he did struggle with the kicks of Benitez as well. So, obviously the guy struggles with that calf kick, but, in general, it does seem like he struggles a bit finding his range against guys who have a good kicking game. And, that is pretty concerning here because Martinez is kind of a specialist with the kicks, very diverse kicking attack. Solid calf kick, good body kicks, teeps, and head kicks as well. Just does a really good job of mixing it up. Has a pretty sneaky knee up the middle as well. But overall, I'd say Martinez, he can be a little one-dimensional in that regards as well. He does have decent hands, but the majority of his offense is going to be with the kicks. The guy's got pretty solid takedown defense. However, his striking defense can get a little lax in there. Obviously he was knocked out by Davy Grant, and Alejandro Perez was able to get a knockdown on him as well. So Martinez, he does have to stay, defensively sound in there. Because someone like Morales, who does have pretty quick hands and pretty good timing, could potentially catch him on a counter. But I do think that stylistically this is a pretty tough matchup for Morales here because, again, Morales does seem to struggle with kickers. And, there's really nothing to suggest that he's fixed that part of his game as well. However, I will say this, though, Martinez isn't as devastating of a calf kicker as Gutierrez is. Martinez, I think, does a good job of attacking all three levels, whereas, Gutierrez, I think his calf kicks are, I'd say much more damaging than someone like Martinez's. But, Martinez, they do train together, I think, so maybe he's been working on that a little bit. But overall, I do think that Martinez, his striking game, I think, is a little more diverse than someone like than Gutierrez. So, overall, I kind of struggle to see Morales, being able to do much here. Maybe outside of catching Martinez early with a counter or something, I just don't see him having too much success as the fight progresses, because I do think that once those kicks start to add up, we start to see the offensive Morales start to dwindle a little bit. Maybe he'll start to freeze up a little bit, be a little hesitant, maybe even get some flashbacks from the Gutierrez fight. And I do also think that, once those leg kicks start to add up, he'll be a little less mobile in there. He's going to have a little more difficulty, sitting down on his punches as well. So I think that Morales, he might have some success early. He might even be able to clip Martinez, but I do think that going into that second and third round, I think the kicking game of Martinez should start to take over. Over under, I'd probably set it at 2.5 just because, it's kind of interesting actually because obviously I think that the leg kick knockout is on the table here. We've seen it happen before. Even though Martinez, I don't think is as devastating of a calf kicker as Gutierrez, I do still think that it's potentially on the table, and I do think that Morales could knock Martinez out as well, but I actually kind of favor it to go the over. I think it's going to be similar to the Alejandro Perez fight. It might be a little dicey for Martinez early, but Martinez not someone with a ton of killer instinct. He's kind of content to just, stay at distance and just coast on the leg kick. So I kind of think this fight does go over, but, I wouldn't be surprised if someone gets finished here because both have been finished. It'd just be kind of funny to see Morales get finished for the second time by leg kicks. But I feel like, going into this matchup, he might, shore it up a little bit. So I think it goes to the over. I think Martinez likely wins unanimous decision here, probably 29-28. So give me Martinez by decision. And in the next fight, we have Omar Morales versus Uros Medic, and Morales is the minus 150 favorite. Comeback on Medic is plus 130, and we'll start with Medic first. So, Medic, kickboxer, coming off of a loss to Jailton Turner. Bit of a wake-up call in that fight. Would like to have seen a little more from him, but it's kind of hard to fault him in that fight because, as it turns out, Jailton Turner is an absolute beast. And I don't think it's a terrible look to have gotten finished by him whatsoever. So I'll give him a bit of a pass there, but would like to have seen him extended in fights just because Medic, he does have a lot of fights that end in that first round. But, as far as what Medic does well, he is a good kickboxer, good footwork, a very kick-heavy fighter, really likes to attack that inside leg and the body. But, like I was saying before, the issue with Medic is he does have a ton of early finishes, and it is against some pretty low-level guys. Doesn't really have a legitimate win yet. And from what it looks like, it does seem like he might be a little weak to the body. Granted, it was against Turner, who, again, is an absolute monster. So not sure how much you could take from that. And, he's going up against Morales, who is a pretty solid kickboxer as well, right? However, with Morales, I think he's actually a bit more plotty in there. He's kind of bad at cutting off the cage, actually. I remember watching, I think, the Chikadze fight, and he was kind of just chasing Chikadze around the ring. But with Morales, he does seem to have a bit of power. He does like to sit down on his punches, and he does load up pretty big on a lot of them. Typically, he's throwing a lot of singular strikes, but, he does throw with intent, and when it does connect, it is pretty impactful. However, it does mean he's pretty lowish in terms of the volume. But taking a look at this matchup, I do think that it should be a pretty fun fight. Should be a largely kickboxing affair, pretty back and forth on the feet. So I think it'll be pretty exciting. I don't think either guy's going to be looking for takedowns here. But going back to this matchup, so despite everything I've kind of said about Medic and all the red flags I've brought up, I still actually kind of like him in this spot. He, has shown he's pretty wild against lower level guys, but I like that in the limited time I saw him against Turner, he showed a lot more composure, was feinting a lot more. Wasn't, throwing those big, wild, loopy shots that he was against lower-level guys. Ultimately, he did lose, but I saw some development in his game. But as far as, I guess, this stylistic matchup, I think that the footwork and the kicks could give Morales some trouble. I'm looking at the Chikadze fight, and, I kind of just want to preface by saying I don't think that Medic is the same fighter as Chikadze. I don't think he's on the same level as Chikadze, but, I do see some potential, similarities in this matchup. Chikadze's got good footwork, good southpaw striking that gave Morales trouble. And while Morales did do well against a southpaw striker in Benitez, I felt that Benitez is a lot less mobile. Benitez is someone who is kind of content to stand in front of his opponent and trade with him in the pocket. Medic style, is a little more similar to Benitez. Really nice inside leg kicks, body kicks that he likes to throw. Good footwork, good lateral movement, which I do think could give Morales some trouble, because I do think that Morales is a bit plotty on the feet, not really good at cutting off the cage. So I think that he'll have a harder time landing clean on someone like Medic. And like I was saying before, I think that the inside leg and the body kick will be there all day for Medic, and he could eventually switch it up to attack the head as well and do a bit of damage that way. And on top of that, I think that Medic might have a bit of a speed advantage as well. He's going to be the much younger fighter, and he's got the much better frame for the division also. So I think that Medic might have a bit more upside. Omar, he could land something big, but I don't think he's got the same power as Turner. Turner's got some crazy quick hands, does a good job of putting combinations together, and is a big hitter as well, which is a different skill set and a completely different sort of threat than what Morales brings to the table here. So stylistically, I feel that it might be favorable to Medic, but obviously there are still a lot of red flags. I think that, Medic not having been extended, is potentially detrimental to him. On top of that, Morales does have quite a bit more, experience advantage. He's fought way better guys. We've actually seen him, go into that second and third round, and he has actually done well, going to a decision as well. Morales, he has struggled a bit moving down to 145, but I think that coming back up to 155, he'll probably put on a better performance, but I think that ultimately he will come up a little short in this fight. I just like the stylistics a lot more for Medic. On top of that, outside of the experience, Medic, he's going to be the much younger fighter. He's going to be the rangier fighter, and I just think that he's going to be able to come out ahead in a lot of these striking exchanges. Obviously, there are concerns with the fact that he hasn't really been extended, but I think he should be fine in a 15-minute kickboxing fight. Where I would have concerns is if he's going up against someone who could potentially grapple and wrestle and take him down, later in fights, in which case I do think it'll get a lot hairier for him. But as someone who is a kickboxer, I think that he shouldn't have too much issue, fighting hard, in terms of just pure kickboxing for, 10, 15 minutes. So I'm going to go with Medic here. I think Medic likely gets it done by decision. Morales has shown a crazy chin in there. He was eating some pretty crazy shots from Benitez, and from Chikadze as well. So I don't think that Medic is going to be hitting any harder than these guys. Obviously, he could just land a head kick or something. But, outside of that, I don't know if he's going to be able to put Morales out. And, Medic, he has been finished. He is coming off a finish. But I don't know if Morales has that sort of power that Turner brings. So I do think this fight likely goes to decision. And I do think Medic should be able to edge it in the striking exchanges. So give me Medic by decision. And in the next fight, we have Jailton Almeida versus Parker Porter. And Almeida's the minus 800 favorite comeback on. Porter is plus 500. And, pretty crazy fight here. Almeida moving up to heavyweight for this fight. So we'll start with him first. Pretty limited tape from Almeida, even after his UFC debut. But from what I have seen, the guy does seem to be an extremely strong submission grappler. Very explosive with his takedowns. He does seem to have pretty good timing on his level change. He is very aggressive with the submission attempts as well when he does get on top. Pretty good ground and pound. And from what I have seen, he's been able to overpower a lot of his opponents. That said, though, he still is very skilled on the ground. He was able to just cut through the guard of Marquez, who I think is a black belt as well, and he did it with relative ease. Obviously, there are going to be some red flags on the Almeida side. He's got a lot of early finishes, pretty low level of competition, and somewhat limited footage here. And on top of that, he is going to be moving up to heavyweight, so you have to wonder how he's going to deal with guys who are going to have a pretty significant weight advantage over him, whereas that light heavyweight, he's usually the much bigger guy. So a little concerning there, but on the other hand, it does mean that Almeida's not going to have to cut any weight, and that could be good for him in terms of maybe his durability and his cardio. But taking a look at his opponent, Parker Porter, a bit of a fan favorite at this point on a nice little run. He's a pretty fun fighter to watch. He is someone who will move forward and throw volume. He puts combinations together pretty well, and he does have a pretty effective low kick also. The guy's able to do a bit of damage with it, and, not surprised. The guy's got some massive legs on him. But the truth is with Porter is he's fought just 3 of the lowest level heavyweights on the roster in Parisian, Jay Sherman, and Alan Badeau, all just very low level heavyweight strikers. And he was able to beat them with just superior conditioning and volume. And, honestly, I haven't seen too much from the defensive grappling of Porter. I feel like a lot of the guys he's fought, even on the regional scenes, just pretty low-level strikers, not anyone who's been able to take him down and really control him. There was a fight where he got submitted a while ago, but I think that was more of like a club and sub scenario, and that was like 10 years ago, so I don't know if you could really take much from it. So really not much to go off in this fight. And so I feel like it's a pretty easy pass, especially with where the money line is here at this point. I think you'll have to maybe look at the props. And honestly, I wouldn't blame anyone for betting Porter in this spot. Almeida, a lot of unanswered questions here. I think that Almeida should be able to take Porter down and submit him. But, moving up to heavyweight, you really do have to wonder how his conditioning is going to look if he isn't able to get Porter out of there in that first round. Because there is a chance that, maybe he goes a little too hard for the takedowns. He's using a little too much energy. And if he isn't able to get Porter out of there, I can kind of see Porter maybe being able to take over, in that second and third round. But ultimately, I just don't know if Porter's athleticism is quite there to be able to fully take advantage, because I think that even a pretty gassed out Almeida will be able to hit takedowns and get cop control time in that second round. And I don't know if Porter's a big enough hitter to really punish Almeida on the feet. Like, for Porter to win, I legitimately think that Almeida is going to have to just completely gas himself out to the point where, he's not able to defend strikes. And I don't know, like, it'd have to be pretty bad for Almeida to lose here, in my opinion. But as far as an official pick goes, I think I got to go with Almeida here. I think he likely gets it done by round 1 submission. But it's really hard to be confident, right? Because there's just way too many variables here. Obviously, Almeida moving up, Almeida not really getting extended, and just the fact that we don't really know what the takedown defense or the defensive grappling of Porter really looks like. Because, if he's got decent takedown defense and, somewhat decent get-ups, it could be a very, very interesting fight. But ultimately, what's really keeping me off of Porter here is just that I mean, he's just not that athletic, and at the end of the day, I think he's more of a middleweight, and I just don't know if he's going to be able to provide too much resistance. Like the Badeau fight, I think was a bit of a wake-up call because I expected him to beat Badeau pretty handily there, but Badeau was able to take a round off Porter and, keep it somewhat competitive just based off of his athleticism because, I just felt that Porter overall was the better fighter, but Badeau was, I think, the better athlete and had the better frame for the division as well. And, with Almeida, I think it's a similar situation. Almeida's pretty solid athlete, and the guy's, I think, juiced to the tits. So, physically, he's probably going to be the stronger guy, even though Porter's going to be the heavier guy. I think that even though Porter's going to be heavier, Almeida's probably got a frame that's a little more suitable in heavyweight than Porter. So I got to go with Almeida here. I think he likely gets it done by round 1 submission. But, the over-unders for this fight going to be pretty weird. I think it's going to be set at like minus, or not minus, but 1.5. Which, it's a little weird, right? Because I do think that Almeida's pretty live to get that early submission, but I think that if he isn't, though, it could just end up being a pretty sloppy heavyweight fight where he's just laying on top of Porter for, extended periods. Because at the end of the day, I do think he's the superior grappler. But, if he isn't able to muscle around, a bigger, heavier guy, he might just end up resorting to a bit of lay and pray and kind of coast to a decision here. So I like Almeida by submission, but I wouldn't be surprised if he just ends up winning a very sloppy, grindy sort of decision as well. And in this fight, we have Alen Amedovski versus Joseph Holmes, and Holmes is the minus 190 favorite. Comeback on Amedovski is plus 165. And, not too much to say about this matchup. This is a pretty low-level affair between two guys who probably aren't UFC caliber. But I'll start with Amedovski. So with Amedovski, pretty straightforward. The guy is a brawler, essentially. Not a good fighter at all. Very herky-jerky on the feet. Likes to just wing big punches and just brawl in the pocket. He's had a lot of success on the regionals, just blasting guys early. But, he tried doing that against, Phillips, who is a pretty low-level, UFC fighter, and got destroyed there, and then just got completely out-grappled by Njokuani in his second outing. So, the guy, I think, is a pretty limited fighter. He kind of sucks off his back. He's been taken down and controlled on the regionals as well. So, overall, I just really don't think that Amedovski's a good fighter. I think he's pretty much round 1 knockout or bust. And on top of that, he's coming off of a 2.5-year-long layoff. He's going to be going up against Joseph Holmes, who is a pretty young, well-rounded fighter. He's got a decent jab, a little slow, and the output doesn't seem to be great. But it does look like he's more of a grappler, generally likes to get the fight to the ground. Overall, I do still think his game is still a bit unpolished. But I do think he's good enough here to get the win. Unless Amedovski blasts him early, which, definitely can happen here. I think the grappling of Holmes should take over. Amedovski's just looked terrible off his back. I think his takedown defense is pretty horrendous. Obviously, Njokuani was able to just neutralize him on the ground. Njokuani, he is a UFC level fighter, though, but I remember watching a fight in Bellator, with Amedovski. His opponent was able to take him down and hold him down for a good amount of time. He was able to pop back up and just land some big bombs on his opponent and eventually get the knockout. But that was against, I think, a 4-0 fighter or something. I think Holmes, a little better than that. But, I wouldn't be completely surprised if Amedovski just comes out here and takes his head off. But I do think that if Holmes is able to weather that early storm, I think the grappling should take over for him. Very low confidence, though. Amedovski's 0-2 in the UFC. Holmes is 0-1 in the UFC. Neither guy's really beaten anyone good on the regionals. I think both guys have, just fought very low level of competition. Just two very unproven guys. So, not a pick I have, or not a pick I'm making with a ton of conviction here. And honestly, I'm kind of just defaulting to Holmes because I do think that he's going to be the better minute winner, past that first round. I really do think that Amedovski is round 1 knockout or bust. So yeah, I'm probably going to go with Holmes here, probably by round 2 submission or something. Over under, I'd probably set at around like 1.5. I do think that Amedovski's a bit of a kill or be killed fighter. But, this is not a fight I really want to be touching in that regards either because, I do think that Amedovski could maybe get the knockout early. And, I do think that if he doesn't get Holmes out of there, we might see Holmes, lock up a submission if Amedovski starts to slow down. But, I don't think Holmes has got the best gas tank either. So I can definitely see Holmes just lay on top of him for, rounds 2 and round 3 and just grind out a decision that way. So very, very weird fight, very high variance, very low level. So I think, we could get a number of outcomes here. But, as far as an official pick goes, I'll just go with Holmes by round 2 submission. And moving along, we have Eryk Anders versus Jun-Young Park. And Park is the minus 235 favorite. Comeback on Anders is plus 200. And so I guess we'll start with the underdog in Anders first. So with Anders, he is a solid athlete in my opinion. But I think he's a pretty middling fighter overall. Very inconsistent as well. He does seem to have some power and can strike a bit. But I just don't know what he does particularly well. Like, his striking is serviceable. He does seem to have some power. He's got a decent clinch game, and he has shown he can mix in a bit of the wrestling, but I just don't feel like he really excels in any of those departments. He just seems kind of middling there and has been able to kind of just get by with his physicality. But overall, he is a solid athlete, pretty strong, good cardio and durability, which, I feel like it can win you fights, but skill-wise, I just don't think he's that good of a fighter. And he's going to be going up against Jun-Young Park, who, it's a very interesting matchup because I feel like he's kind of the opposite of Anders. Park, not a phenomenal athlete by any means. Honestly, the guy's a little undersized for the division. He's a little flabby as well, but he does have, a pretty well-rounded skill set. I think he's actually a pretty skilled fighter as well. He's got good footwork, does a really good job of, fighting behind the jab. And, something that Park, I think, does really well is he's really good at intercepting with the jab and just really throwing off the rhythm of his opponents. He's got good low leg kick as well, good combinations and counterpunching. Has shown he could wrestle a bit as well and seems to be a pretty proficient grappler. But, there are concerns with the Park side. He is undersized, like I said before. I think that it could be an issue in this fight because I think Anders is going to be the much more physical fighter. And on top of that, it does look like Park, he actually can be broken in, high-paced fights. We saw in the Hernandez fight, Hernandez was able to push a pretty crazy grappling pace on him and break him. And also in the Rodriguez fight as well, where, they were exchanging quite a bit. And, Park, he actually had Rodriguez on the ropes for a little bit, but got a little sloppy and ended up getting TKO'd there. And we also saw in that fight that Park can get sucked into a brawl as well, which is a bit concerning. But taking a look at this matchup, I kind of favor Park, skill for skill. I think he's just the better fighter. I think that he could probably just outpoint Anders on the feet, just use his superior footwork and his movement in there to just outpoint him. He's going to be the quicker guy in there. He's the much more diverse striker. The output is much better. He's shown, I think, a slightly more well-rounded skill set, but big concern in this fight is going to be the physicality. He's given up a ton of size. I can see Anders kind of just cage pushing a lot in this fight, just holding Park in the clinch, pushing him against the cage and just kind of grinding on him and maybe just making this a very grindy, sloppy sort of fight. But overall, I think I still have to lean the Park side just because I think maybe he's got a few more paths to victory. And skill for skill, I just think he's the better fighter in there. But where the line is now does seem a little wide. I saw that it actually opened as near a pick'em, which, I felt like all the value would have been on Park. But as it stands now, I feel like the value is actually on Anders now because I do think that Anders, he could make this a very close fight if he's able to get his hands on Park. And on top of that, Anders is a pretty big hitter. So I think that he could potentially land something big on Park as well and either sit him down, which could swing the round, or just even knock him out. So, where the line is now, it's a little wide. If I were to play the Park side, it'd probably be Park by decision. I could see him just outworking Anders in this fight. But I kind of do favor this fight to go the distance as well. I know there's going to be a lot of fights on this card that go the distance, I think. But, yeah, I just think that historically, both guys are actually pretty tough. I think that if anyone's getting knocked out, it's probably going to be Park. He is coming off of a knockout loss. Anders does have big power. I don't think Park is knocking Anders out. Anders, he's eating way bigger punches from way heavier hitters. and was able to go to a decision with them. Park is not exactly a big hitter. He's more of like a point fighter. So I think if there's any finish, it's likely, on the Park side, or I think it's Park getting finished. But outside of that, I do think that it likely goes to decision. Anders not exactly like out here, chucking heat, and he's not really pushing much of a pace these days anyways. So I think it likely goes to decision, and if it goes there, I kind of favor Park. So official pick, Park by decision. And in the next fight, we have Polyana Viana versus Tabatha Ricci, and Ricci's the minus 150 favorite come back on. Viana is plus 125. So line movement as I'm doing this podcast already. So we'll start with Viana, the underdog here. So with Viana, she is primarily a grappler. On the feet, she does stand a bit upright. The offensive striking is okay, but she is a bit flat-footed. And overall, she does seem a lot more comfortable on the ground. But, she is actually content to get into prolonged striking affairs. I don't think that Viana's got great wrestling or anything, but she does seem to have decent timing on the level change and does seem to have some nice judo throws that she likes to go to. But, she's more of a grappler. She does seem to have some pretty slick submissions in there, pretty good in transitions. However, she can get a little sloppy, can be a little submission over position. And she is someone who will play off her back. So, a little concerning in those regards. But overall, I think that Viana is an okay fighter with a decent skill set. But I think that her tendencies aren't great for getting her wins consistently. Like, I feel that she is kind of sub or bust because, she's kind of hittable on the feet, so the optics aren't going to be great. And on top of that, she does give up a lot of control time. So I do feel that overall, Viana's minute winning ability isn't that great. But she is going to be going up against Tabatha Ricci, who is a grappler as well. Pretty limited striking from Ricci's side. She does like to swing big on the feet. But the thing with Ricci is she is pretty persistent with her grappling. Does seem to have, pretty decent wrestling. Nice double leg and reactive takedowns. Does have some judo throws in her arsenal as well. And, on top, she is pretty aggressive with the ground and pound. We'll look to advance positions and look for submissions. However, it has been against some pretty low-level competition. I don't think she's got any notable wins at all. She did fight Furo, but got completely washed there in an absolute mismatch of a fight. So it's kind of hard to take much from that. But, as far as her wins go, I don't think she's really beaten anyone good. I guess you can kind of say that about Viana as well, but she's at least been in the UFC for a little longer. But taking a look at this matchup, I do think it's a pretty competitive fight. I think that I might actually favor Viana on the feet for this one. I think that she's the taller, rangier striker. I think that her offensive striking is actually a bit sharper than Ricci's. Ricci's really just looking to wing bombs in there. I think that as far as the grappling goes, I think both are very solid grapplers. Ricci seems to be the much more aggressive wrestler and the better wrestler, and seems to be a bit more reliable to grapple, whereas with Viana, she is a little more opportunistic with her grappling, and she is content to fight at range in a lot of her fights. But overall, I feel like this should still be a very competitive fight. I think it's a little closer to 50-50 here, honestly. I might even favor Viana a little bit. The only concern really is Viana's tendency to get stuck on her back and that she doesn't really aggressively pursue the grappling. I think that, in this matchup, there is a very real likelihood that we see Ricci just repeatedly hit takedowns or just get enough top control time and be able to grind Viana out on top and win minutes that way. But I just feel that the approach from Viana might be a little different in this fight. Viana, historically, she has been someone who likes to attack submissions off her back. But that's against, lower level girls who she's able to do that against. I feel that against another black belt in Ricci, she might not want to stay on her back for too long, especially if the submission isn't materializing. So I do think that if Ricci is able to hit takedowns, I expect Viana to be able to work her way back up. Because the thing with Ricci is, she is kind of undersized for the division. She's a good grappler, but she's given up a lot of size in this fight, and she was giving up size in her last fight as well against Maria Oliveira, and I really don't think Oliveira is a good fighter. I think Oliveira is more of a striker. pretty bad defensive grappling tendencies, and even she was able to work her way back up against Ricci. So I think another black belt in Viana, who I think should be better with her defensive grappling, should be able to offer more resistance, should be able to work her way back up to the feet, and do a bit of work on the feet in the striking to kind of even it out. And on top of that, I think that Viana could hit takedowns as well. So overall, I just feel this fight is, pretty 50-50. I don't think that Ricci should be this big of a favorite, although it does look like the line's actually coming in quite a bit. In fact, I actually had a bet placed on Viana at plus 145, but by the time I fired up the podcast, she dropped down to like plus 125. So a ton of money is coming on Viana, and honestly, I'm not feeling particularly great about this bet, just because I really don't like what I've seen from Viana off her back, and Ricci, she is a pretty aggressive wrestler. So, kind of glad I got in early, because I think that I could potentially hedge out of this and just settle with a slightly smaller profit. But I don't know, I might just let it fly, because this is a decent step up in competition for Ricci, and I just don't know if she'll have as much grappling success against another high level grappler in Viana. So official pick for this fight, I think I am going to go with Viana here. I think she likely gets it done by decision. This fight I think likely does go to decision, just because both fighters, they're pretty high level grapplers, and again, unless someone gets caught in like a transition or something, I just don't know if someone's getting submitted. That said, though, Viana, she has been submitted before by Macedo of all people, so I wouldn't completely rule it out here. The over is probably going to be pretty juiced. I probably wouldn't touch it at this point, just because I do think that someone could slip up here, and Viana has shown she could slip up, so I wouldn't go too hard on the overs in this fight. But official pick, I'm going to go with Viana. I'm going to go with Viana by decision. And in the next fight, we have Chidi Njokuani versus Duško Todorović. And Njokuani's the minus 180 favorite. Comeback on Todorović is plus 165. And we'll start with the big favorite in Njokuani here. So, Njokuani's coming off of a pretty electric knockout of a fan favorite in Marc-Andre Barrios. Solid regional vet in Chidi. Does do a decent job of fighting long and using his length. Very good jab, 1-2. Does seem to have some power in his hands. Does seem to be pretty strong in the clinch as well. Some very nasty knees there, and he does seem to do a good job with the attritional work as well. The front kicks, the knees in the clinch. And on top of that, he has fought some, pretty solid competition regionally. He is quite seasoned, but he does seem to struggle a bit when taking that step up in competition. And, he is someone that actually does slow down a bit in fights, and historically has struggled against, solid grapplers. But with Todorović, he's primarily a striker, pretty good volume, good clinch work, solid kicking game as well, is good at attacking all three levels. But, the issue with Todorović, as we all know, is going to be his defensive tendencies, hands down, really likes to rely heavily on that head movement. And sometimes he just tends to back up into a straight line, which it doesn't seem like he's really shored up all that much. It looked a little better against Rodriguez. However, he was getting hit a lot in that fight, which isn't a great look. And, Rodriguez, I believe, was coming in short notice in that fight, I want to say. But, in this matchup, he's going to have to be careful, because he is going up against a very big hitter in Chidi. And, I feel like a veteran in Chidi could definitely, exploit some of the defensive tendencies of Todorović. I think that if Todorović is getting a little predictable with his head movement, I think that Chidi could potentially just knock him out in that first round. I know that he's coming off of a first round knockout, so, I don't want to overrate the striking of Chidi, but, he is a good striker, and I do think that if Todorović, he's leaning back like he normally is, I think that Chidi could probably just line him up for like a big 1-2, or just put some combinations together and just be able to touch Todorović up early. So I think that early knockout for Chidi is live, but, even if he doesn't get the knockout, I think that with how hittable Todorović is, I think that Chidi might be able to just kind of touch him up throughout the fight. Now, with that being said, though, I do actually think that Todorović has actually got a path to victory here. I think that if he's able to mix in the grappling and just make this a very dirty, grimy sort of fight, he can win it. Duško, he likes to work in the clinch. Chidi is very well versed there, and he does have some very nice knees in the clinch. But, if Todorović is able to get this fight to the ground, I think he could do a bit of damage to Chidi, just because Chidi doesn't exactly have the best ground game. And if you're able to take him down and just grind on him a bit, I think it'll make his striking far less effective. But overall, I still do have to favor Chidi in this spot. I think that he could knock Todorović out early. And even if the fight does get extended, I think he should be able to land some of the more damaging strikes to win at least 2 of the 3 rounds. But I do have a pretty weird feeling about this fight. I'm pretty low on Duško after his last few performances. And Chidi, he is coming off of a pretty electric knockout. So I think the line is kind of inflated a little bit. So, I don't know if I really want to touch this from a money line perspective. This just feels like a very, very weird matchup. This fight feels very trappy to me. But as far as an official pick, I guess I'll probably just go with Chidi here by round 1 knockout. And I actually kind of favor this fight to not go the distance. I think that, Chidi obviously can get the knockout early. Todorović, he does have some pretty poor defensive tendencies. He has been knocked out before. And, Chidi, he's actually been finished before too, right? So I do think that Todorović could potentially get the finish. Todorović has actually got some power in his hands. Back in the day, he's been able to finish a lot of guys. Hasn't had a lot of success at the UFC level yet, but, the guy, I think, does have potential to finish. And, especially if Chidi's starting to slow down later in fights, I think Todorović could get the late finish as well. So I think this fight likely does end inside the distance. But official pick, I think I'm going to go with Chidi by round 1 knockout. And in the co-main event, we have Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Michel Pereira. And this fight is lined at a pick'em right now, -110 both ways. And yeah, I do actually think it's lined pretty well, because I do think this is a very compelling matchup between 2 pretty fun strikers. But we'll start with the veteran in Ponzinibbio first. So, like I was saying, Ponzinibbio is a pretty seasoned veteran at this point. Pretty good footwork, distance management. He's got good shot selection. He's someone who does like to move forward and pressure opponents, and just throw volume out there. The guy did have some health concerns, and is getting a little up there in age, but outside of the Li Jingliang fight, he's actually looked pretty good. He's lost a bit of his quickness, but his ability to just make reads and adjustments in fights are still there. And, the guy still has that, veteran savvy with him, or about him, I guess. And he's going to be going up against Michel Pereira, who is primarily a striker as well. He used to be a bit of a wild man, but seems to have toned it down a bit. I mean, he will still occasionally throw in just a random Superman punch or a backflip or something, but compared to him, earlier in his career, he's definitely a lot more tame. And, now that he's fighting a lot more technically, I think that he's doing a lot better. Obviously, he's shown very good lateral movement. And, for someone his size, he actually seems to move pretty well and is actually kind of quick, surprisingly quick. He's got a nice jab, a very good diverse kicking game, really good front kick and low kick. He has shown he can mix in some of the wrestling as well. Does seem to have a decent top game. So yeah, I really like the overall game of Pereira. He does slow down in fights, but he does seem to fight through it pretty well. And now that he's paced himself a little better, I think that he could put on a very solid 2.5 round performance. But taking a look at this matchup, I do think it's a very evenly matched fight. I think it's going to be pretty back and forth on the feet. I think it'll be one of these fights that'll come down to really what the judges are scoring in there. Ponzinibbio is actually more of a headhunter than Pereira. He does throw in a few kicks, but by and large, he's just throwing a lot of head strikes in there. Pereira, I think, is the more dynamic striker. He's going to throw a lot more kicks. He's going to work the low kicks, the body kicks, the teep. He's a little more reliable to wrestle as well. So as far as the diversity in the offense, I definitely favor Pereira, but sometimes the judges don't favor that as much. Pereira could just be pumping the jab out, working the kicks, and working the body kicks and stuff. But if Ponzi's landing the same amount of head strikes, it could end up being edged towards him because, maybe some of the judges favor the head strikes a little more than, some of the attritional work that Pereira is doing. So, it's kind of hard to really get a read on in that regards. But personally, I kind of have to favor the more diverse striking game of Pereira here. I like his footwork and lateral movement as well. I think the leg kicks probably couldn't give Ponzinibbio some trouble. Baeza was definitely having success there. The issue with Baeza, though, was he just never really let his hands go. He just committed to the leg kicking game. And, if he had mixed in a few more like head strikes, I think he would have had a bit more success. And I do think that that's something that Pereira could do in this fight. I think that, his lateral movement is going to give Ponzinibbio some trouble here. I think his kicking game is going to give Pereira a bit of issues. And, Pereira's actually, pretty good at, pumping out the jab, mixing in the 1-2 and really picking certain shots to sit down on. And I think that might actually be able to swing him the rounds, because I think that overall Pereira is probably going to be landing some of the harder shots, the more impactful shots, whereas I think Ponzinibbio is going to be landing, I think, much more consistent volume with the head strike. So I think it's going to be pretty 50-50, honestly, but I kind of favor Pereira to kind of edge it. I think that if Pereira is also able to hit like a takedown or something with like 30 seconds left on the clock, he could steal around. Very similar to what he did in the Chaos Williams fight. So I actually think that Pereira's, got pretty underrated like fight IQ and ring craft. So yeah, I kind of like Pereira in the spot. I might honestly bet him for something small here, just because I do think he likely edges it with the more diverse striking attack and his ability to maybe mix in some takedowns. On top of that, he's going to be the bigger dude. He's going to be the rangier guy. He's going to be younger as well. So, these are all attributes I kind of like when it comes to these very close matchups. So for an official prediction, I'm going to go with Pereira here. I think he maybe wins a split decision, and I do think this fight likely goes the distance as well. Both guys are actually more of, I'd say, volume strikers than they are like heavy hitters. Don't get me wrong, both guys can crack, but by and large, they're more of just guys who like to pump out the volume and, point fight a little bit. And on top of that, both guys have shown some pretty good durability. So I don't think anyone's getting put out here. So I'm going to go with Pereira. I'm going to go with Pereira by split decision. And in the main event, we have Holm versus Ketlen Vieira, and Holm is the -200 favorite come back on. Vieira is +170. And we'll start with the underdog in Vieira. So with Vieira, she is a pretty well-rounded fighter, more of a grappler in my opinion. But, I do think that her striking is competent enough to hang with a lot of the fighters in the division. That said, though, I don't really think that is saying too much, because the division overall is pretty weak. But, Vieira, she is pretty big, pretty physical for the weight class. She's got a nice jab, a nice straight right. However, she's kind of plotty and slow on the feet and is somewhat hittable. She's had the most success when she's able to take opponents down and control them. But, she's not really great at doing damage. I'm looking at the Eubanks fight and the Kunitskaya fight where she was able to get a ton of control time, but wasn't really able to do any damage. And it seems the judges don't seem to like that really much. Obviously she got the Kunitskaya fight taken away from her. A lot of people disagreed, but I guess the judges saw that even though she had a lot of control time, it was Kunitskaya that was just landing more strikes. And then we saw the Zingano fight as well, where a lot of control time, but it ended up going to a split decision in that fight. So, I guess the judges aren't a big fan of Vieira's like kind of lay and pray style. Vieira also does seem to slow down in fights and will accept bottom position, if she is taken down as well. And, she's going up against Holm, who is a very good striker, very high-level fighter, extensive background in the boxing and kickboxing, good movement, good footwork. Her hands still look pretty crisp for her age, does a good job of putting combinations together well. Good volume and output, even at 40, her cardio and conditioning looks pretty solid. That said, though, she's actually coming off of an injury and a longish layoff, so it remains to be seen how she's going to look going into this fight. But, in her most recent outing against Aldana, she still looked very good, was able to put on a clinic against Aldana. someone who is, a pretty highly rated fighter in this division. Showed that she can mix in the takedowns as well, but like I was saying before, the concern with Holm is that, it's a year and a half long layoff. She's 40 years old, and, she is coming off of an injury. So, it's concerning in that regards, but, as far as this matchup goes, I do still have to favor Holm here. Yeah, she's the better striker by a mile. Her takedown defense is solid. I think that she should be able to stuff the takedowns of Vieira. Vieira is not like a prolific wrestler, and she's kind of slow too. So I think Holm is going to be able to see a lot of the shots coming from Vieira. I think that Holm, even at 40, is probably the more physically stronger fighter. She's probably on all sorts of juice right now, so wouldn't be surprised if she was able to kind of bully Vieira in the clinch, which brings me to my next point. I think that, if things really start going sideways for Holm, she could probably just kind of hold Vieira in the clinch, push her against the cage, and kind of just, slow this fight down and just rack up control time, dirty box a little bit. Very similar fight, or very similar performance to the Pennington performance, where she kind of just out Raquel there, was able to just hold her against the cage and just grind her out for most of the fight. And that is something that I do think Holm can do in this fight, because Vieira, she was actually struggling in the clinch a bit against Kunitskaya, and even Tate was having some success there. And, I do think that Holm is a bit more physical than these two, and I think is a better fighter than these two. So I think that Holm can have success there. So yeah, I think skill for skill, Holm is just the better fighter. She's fought way better competition. I think she's the better athlete as well. The only issue is, she is getting a bit up there in age, the long layoff, and again, the injury. So, if that's affected her physicality, if it's affected her skill set at all, it could make this a much closer fight than it needs to be. But I just think that this is Holm all day here. So, unless she's, run into some severe regression, she really should be able to just out volume Vieira here. I think she outstrikes her. I think she could just hold her in the clinch if she really needs to. I don't know how Vieira wins this outside of, maybe getting on top of Holm for 3 rounds and just laying praying her, or maybe just pulling off a crazy submission, which, potentially can happen. Holm has been submitted before, but I feel like that's maybe a part of her game that has been shored up a little bit more as she's gotten a bit older, because, the last time she was submitted was, I believe it was the Tate fight back in the day. So it's been a while now. So yeah, I really do think that Holm should take this. I've already bet her at like -200 for a little bit. Honestly, if it wasn't for the long layoff and the injury and the age, I'd probably like max better, because I think that Holm is just the way better fighter. But father time is a real factor here. And, if Holm has regressed a bit, then, Vieira might have some opportunities. But overall, I do think that Holm should win this, likely by decision. Yeah, I do favor her to win by decision, actually. Vieira, pretty tough girl. I don't think Holm is pulling off the submission against Vieira, and I don't think Holm is knocking her out. Holm, is going to be able to, I think, just volume her up. So yeah, I'm going to go with Holm here. Holm by unanimous decision. And that'll do it for this episode of the podcast. Appreciate everybody for listening and hanging in for this long. Results really have not been great these past few weeks. A lot of sideways movements. This past month has actually been pretty bad, but hopefully we could turn this around, go on a nice little run here and rip something off. Regardless, though, I do appreciate everyone for tuning in and listening every week. I really appreciate the support. It's honestly really encouraging, even though I've been taking L's these past few weeks. Hopefully I could give a better account of myself, for this week. Really would like to go on this, extended break on a winning note. But regardless, I'm going to continue to keep grinding here, and maybe drop the next episode a little early, depending on how soon they get these lines out. I have started a bit of tape on some of the upcoming cards, but none of the lines are out yet, and I don't want to start too early and have fights drop out, because I really don't like that either. So we'll see, though. Depending on how things go, I may get the next episode out a little early, either the next week or the week after, but we'll just see how things shake out. So yeah, that'll do it for this episode. I appreciate everyone for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys next week or the week after.